All right, gentlemen, I would say ladies and gentlemen, well, Myrna's here. So, all right, we call to order the Finance, Ways and Means Appropriations Committee. Will the clerk roll?
Representatives Campbell, Faison, Garrett, Hazelwood, Hicks of Hawkins, Lamar, Miller, Sexton Granger, Shaw, Sparks, Zachary. Chairman Williams, you have a quorum.
Thank you very much. Thank you, members, for showing up today. We'll demerits for those who hadn't made it here yet. But really appreciate you coming today. The topic of discussion today is in regards to the governor's rural broadband initiative that he's included in the budget. As you know, many of you know, he's appropriated $200 million in his budget to continue to spend state's resources towards the expansion of rural broadband. Because of that and the importance of it across our state, and that we've made multi-million-dollar year-over-year investment in rural broadband anyways, I've asked for a couple of departments to come share with them their findings and the methodology behind how we do this, so that we can better understand how these next dollars the governor has proposed can be well spent. And with that being said, I'd like to go out of session without objection and call members of TASR up for first. They're going to talk for about 20 minutes, and then we'll give them some discussion time. I have Clifford. I've already wrote down your last name, lost it now. I'm sorry, Clifford Lippard and Dr. Owen. If you'll come up forward, we're going to go out of session. You can bifurcate yourselves and one at each mic there if you like. You can remove your masks. And we've asked you to present a little bit. TASR has done in 2017, did a study. All the members have had this study as well as a supplement summary of that study distributed to your emails. They're also located on your dashboard if you'd like to follow on there. Gentlemen, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Williams. Just for the record, I'm Cliff Lippard. I'm the Executive Director of the Tennessee Advisory Commission on Intergovernmental Relations. On behalf of our Chairman, Representative Mike Carter, our Vice Chairman, Mayor Kevin Brooks, and the rest of our members, we appreciate this opportunity to be here with you today to discuss our most recent report, our January 2021 report on broadband, internet, adoption, access, and deployment. With me today, I have our policy coordinator, Dr. Matthew Owen. Matt's was the lead author of this report, so he's going to do the yeoman's work on this. So of our 20 minutes, I'm going to talk for about 2, and he's going to have the rest. So just a little bit of quick background before we start. This report was the result of our 2017 report in a way, because that was the first time we took a hard look at broadband, high-speed broadband, internet in Tennessee. And that report was at the request of our then chairman, Senate Majority Leader Mark Norris. And we worked pretty closely with ECD while we were doing that study, because they were simultaneously doing a report, and we relied heavily on the survey work they did for part of their study. Several of the recommendations that came out of that 2017 report eventually made their way into Governor Haslam's initiative, which of course was the foundation for the 2017 Broadband Accessibility Act, which you all passed, which was Public Chapter 228 Acts of 2017. That act also required us to circle back around this year in January 2021 with our new report and kind of update where we are with the deployment of broadband as a result of the 2017 Act, talk about our successes and remaining challenges. And that's where Matt's going to take over. He's going to talk about the findings and recommendations of that report. I would add that several of our staff members, in addition to Dr. Owen, worked on this study. Our senior research manager, Leah Eldridge, was the project manager, but just about everybody on our small staff pitched in to help it. But Matt was definitely the subject matter expert, so now I'm going to let him talk.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, members. My name is Matt Owen, and I am the policy coordinator at TASR. Today, I'm going to try to address 2 questions for you. The first one has 2 parts. How many Tennesseans have access to broadband? And what is the rate of broadband adoption in Tennessee? And then for the second question, what are we already doing to increase broadband access and adoption? And after addressing those, as Dr. Lippert mentioned, I'm going to go over the 5 recommendations that TASER made in its most recent broadband report. They include 1 for improved data, 1 for increasing broadband adoption, and 3 for increasing broadband access. So first, that first question, how many Tennesseans have access to broadband, and what is the rate of broadband adoption? For our study, we relied on data from the Federal Communications Commission. The FCC data show that Tennessee continues to make progress toward eliminating its remaining coverage gaps and improving rates of broadband adoption. As of December 2019, which is the most recent coverage data available from the FCC, almost 94% of Tennesseans lived in census blocks where at least one provider reported that it was capable of offering broadband to at least one location. Now, I've included a couple qualifiers in that sentence, and there are some important limitations in the FCC data that I want to circle back around to in a little bit. But for now, what's important is that that 94% number is up from 88% as of December 2015, which was the data set we used for our prior report. Now, as for broadband adoption, the most recent data that we had from the FCC was from December of 2018. At that time, 58% of households in Tennessee census blocks where providers reported that broadband was available actually subscribed to the service. As with broadband access, that represents an increase from our prior report when we found that the rate was only 40%. So both of these improvements are positive, but we know that there are still gaps in access and adoption that remain. And in particular, the urban-rural divide for broadband access persists, with a greater percentage of those living in urban areas having access to broadband compared with those living in rural areas. Compared with other states and the District of Columbia, Tennessee continues to rank near the middle of the pack. We are 34th overall and 6th in the Southeast for broadband access, and 31st overall, and again, 6th in the Southeast for broadband adoption. So the good news in all of this is that Tennessee is well placed to address the remaining access and adoption gaps based on the public and private initiatives that it already has in place. And this brings me to our second question, which is, what are we already doing to increase broadband access and adoption? And here I'm going to flip the order of things, and I'm going to talk about broadband adoption first. There is no single strategy that we or other researchers have identified as the key for increasing broadband adoption. But what we have found is that strategies that are tailored to meet individual needs can be effective. Some of these strategies include things like digital literacy training, which are intended to help individuals become more comfortable and confident in using their devices and the internet. And other strategies are focused on addressing the cost barriers to broadband adoption that includes both the cost of service and the cost of devices. And I will say that cost continues to be among the most cited reasons why individuals say they don't subscribe to home broadband service. There are a number of public and private entities that are tackling this issue. For example, broadband providers, many of them already offer low-cost service options to qualifying households. Some of them also help connect their customers with low-cost device options, as well as training opportunities. And that's just one of the many examples from the private sector. In terms of the public sector, we focused specifically on the role that libraries and schools are playing in their communities and helping the populations that they serve get online. Again, this includes things like digital literacy training. And we know that a number of libraries across the state have been able to offer these courses as a direct result of the funding that's been made available to them through the state broadband grant program that you all established in 2017. And that feedback from participants in these courses has been overwhelmingly positive. Additionally, libraries and schools, many of them are lending mobile wireless hotspot devices to students or patrons to help them access mobile wireless service. This has been particularly useful for those who either cannot afford home broadband service or for whom wired service is unavailable. In our conversations with representatives for libraries and schools, one of the main barriers that they face in implementing these type of supports is often cost. So again, the state grant program has been particularly beneficial for our libraries. And of course, there have been a number of recent efforts to direct funding to schools for technology purposes in light of the ongoing pandemic. Community partnerships are also helpful. We know that there are some districts, and I think Hamilton County Schools is a good example of this, where they've been able to partner with their local funding bodies, with local businesses and nonprofits to actually pay for home broadband service for a number of the families in their districts that are in need and don't have service at home. So that brings me to the end of my discussion of broadband adoption. With that, I'll transition back to broadband access. We know that our providers continue to invest in expanding coverage in Tennessee, but the challenging economics of providing broadband remains a problem. This is particularly the case in our areas with low population densities, where there are fewer potential subscribers to cover the cost of network deployment. The state is addressing this barrier directly through the state broadband grant program that we mentioned earlier, which also provides funding to providers to help them offset the cost of deploying their networks. And I know that the Department of Economic and Community Development is here today to provide you with more details on that program. But what I want to say is that in our conversations with providers for our research, many of them stressed the importance of these grants in helping them expand coverage in high-cost areas and make the business case to accelerate their deployments. And there are two other aspects that I want to highlight. In particular, ECD limits the grants to no more than 50% of overall project costs, which helps ensure that grant recipients have at least some skin in the game for their projects. And second, each grant includes a requirement for the recipient to expand broadband access to the unserved homes and businesses in its project area. And recipients cannot receive, or to receive their full grant amounts, recipients must also meet these build-out requirements. These build-out requirements in particular have been highlighted as a best practice by outside groups that have compared Tennessee's grant program with some of the incentives and other programs in other states. In addition to this state money, there is a variety of different federal funding that's been made available for broadband programs. And one of the questions that all of this raises is, if we are spending all of this money, how many unserved locations are left in the state, and what is it going to cost to get service to all of them? As part of our research, we were able to develop a couple of very rough estimates of the number of homes remaining in Tennessee that are unserved and the cost to serve them. Because of those limitations in the FCC data that I mentioned earlier, as well as some of the limited information available for federal grant projects, we were unable to develop an exact count of the number of homes remaining. But keeping those things in mind, we estimate that as a baseline, there are 194,000 homes remaining in census blocks in Tennessee where no provider reported broadband as of December 2019. Now, we do know that some of those homes are likely to receive service as a result of projects that have already been awarded state or federal funding, but just haven't been completed yet. So after accounting for those projects, we estimate that there are at least 36,900 homes remaining in those census blocks that will be unserved. Based on the median cost per location in the first 3 rounds of the grant program, which is approximately $4,000 per location, that includes both the state grant and the applicant match, we estimate that the total cost to serve these 36,000 locations could be approximately $149 million, though this could range closer to $354 million if the cost to serve each location ends up being closer to the maximum cost per location we've seen in the state grant program. A couple of takeaways from this are that, number one, filling the remaining coverage gaps in Tennessee is likely going to require a combination of public and private resources. And number two, we simply don't have an exact count of the number of unserved homes and businesses remaining in the state. And this brings me back to those data issues that I brought up near the very beginning. Unfortunately, the FCC data, which are reported for every single census block, for each census block, do not show us whether every address in those census blocks has access to the service reported. This is because broadband providers are not asked to provide address-level data to the FCC. Instead, they are asked to file lists of census blocks in which they can or do offer service to at least one location. If a provider reports that it offers service to one location in a block, then the FCC designates that entire block as served. So as a result, the FCC data represent the maximum extent of coverage at the time at which they are reported. This has been a longstanding issue with the FCC data, and I'm sure many of you were already aware of it before today. The FCC is currently in the process of improving its data, but in the meantime, there are a number of states that have taken measures into their own hands. For example, Georgia, having reached agreements with broadband providers to report address-level data to it for every home and business in the state, has created its own broadband maps, which it updates annually. Based on these maps, Georgia has found that there are at least 255,000 homes and businesses in that state that are located in areas that the FCC has designated as fully served, that are at best, that are in fact in areas that are at best only partially served. Georgia has also been able to use this data to help its state Department of Education determine the number of students in that state who are in areas without broadband access. One important thing to remember when thinking about that model is that safeguards in Georgia's law that established its mapping initiative prevent the data that providers report from being shared in ways that would reveal business-sensitive information. And these safeguards have been critical in facilitating providers' participation in that program, according to staff with Georgia's mapping initiative. So that is my overview of our findings. And based on those findings, I want to now go through the 5 recommendations that TASER made. Our first recommendation is related to better coverage data. The Commission recommends that the Department of Economic and Community Development should develop its own broadband coverage maps for the state, updated annually, based on address-level data reported to it by broadband providers. As is done in Georgia, to encourage providers to participate in this program, the Commission recommends that the General Assembly should mandate that the data reported to ECD for these purposes is protected and cannot be shared in ways that would reveal business-sensitive information. Our second recommendation is related to broadband adoption. The Commission recommends that local governments in the state should continue to identify opportunities to increase funding to libraries and schools, to assist their efforts to facilitate broadband adoption in their communities. And for libraries in particular, the state should continue to support their broadband adoption efforts through the state broadband grant program. Our remaining 3 recommendations are all related to improving broadband access. First, the Commission recommends that the state should continue to fund the state broadband grant program for providers, and that it could also consider increasing the appropriations for this program to accelerate broadband expansion to more unserved areas. Next, in our conversations with a variety of stakeholders, several mentioned other potential incentives that the state or local governments could adopt for providers. Based on our findings for the state grant program and some of the requirements within that program, the Commission recommends that local governments and the state should consider tying any new incentives for broadband providers directly to coverage expansions, while limiting the overall share of project costs that those incentives pay for. Our final recommendation is related to electric cooperatives and municipal utilities. Of course, the 2017 Act authorized electric cooperatives to provide broadband in Tennessee, and of the 22 cooperatives that serve parts of the state, 13 are currently either providing broadband or will be in the near future. The state's municipal utilities have been authorized to provide broadband for 2 decades or so, and currently, I think around 15 of them are currently providing broadband within their communities. Now, as you're all aware, state law contains restrictions that, with limited exceptions, prevent electric cooperatives and municipal electric systems from providing broadband outside of their electric service areas. Multiple bills in recent legislative sessions would have either eased or removed these restrictions. And anecdotally, in conversations with representatives for cooperatives and utilities, it appears that there are several that would be willing to expand service to unserved areas, or to at least some locations outside of their current electric territories, if they were authorized to do so. With that in mind, or keeping that in mind, it's also important to realize or to consider that removing that restriction could potentially create risks, or could potentially put electric ratepayers at risk. This is particularly the case if broadband projects were to fail. So, weighing those risks against the potential to improve access, the Commission recommends that the state should consider eliminating or easing the existing territorial restrictions on electric cooperatives and municipal utilities. But in doing so, the state should also consider ways that it can protect electric ratepayers. For example, by prohibiting these cooperatives or utilities from pledging, loaning, or otherwise using electric system assets to finance broadband projects that are located outside of their electric service areas. I want to thank you for giving me the time to present TASER's findings and recommendations to you, and I am happy to try to address any questions you may have.
Thank you, Dr. Owen. Appreciate that very much. I did have a question for you. We spent, I think we spent a little over $60 million since from 2014 to 2019, which you've included in your study. It looks as if the data suggests that we've only increased our accessibility to broadband by 6% over that same period of time, to a maximum of 88%. That leaves 12%. The reason why I asked that question is the range you gave in the expenditures in order to get complete coverage was a broad range, 150 million to, I think you said 325 million. But if the numbers were consistent, then I would think that the remainder is not going to be as affordable as the other. It seems to me like that the $200 million is exorbitant, I guess, or more than we might need in order to fulfill the idea of getting a statewide coverage. What are your thoughts about that difference between 149 and what we have at 200, and then the 349, I think you said, was the top end range?
So I would say that I think first of all, your intuition that as we get deeper and deeper into the list of unserved locations, that you might see the cost per location increase is probably accurate. So I would keep that in the back of your mind when considering what it might cost to ultimately build out service to every home or business in the state. When it comes to comparing the 149 million versus the 200 million, obviously we didn't do that as part of our research, so right. I don't want to necessarily speak to that per se. I do just want to again to set expectations for what that 36,000 homes number would be. Those are only in census blocks that are listed as fully unserved. So there could also be a number of homes located in census blocks that are listed as served, but those blocks are only partially served. So I would anticipate that our estimate of the number of homes remaining in Tennessee is on the small side.
Right. I would agree with that statement, mainly because the Georgia data that you referenced showed that there were many more people that had not had the coverage, even though they had been listed as having at least some kind of coverage. And so I don't want to take a whole lot of time, but I do have one other question. You didn't touch on it. I think the data is really important as it relates to where we go from here, since the number of people are being served. You referenced the map data in your summary about being able to understand the FCC maps and historically, whether or not they're that accurate or not. Do you know what it cost Georgia in order to develop as far as a cost for those the mapping that they did for themselves?
Yes, I should have mentioned that in our presentation. We did include that in our report. So when we talked with Georgia, with their staff, their startup costs, their initial startup costs were approximately $2 million is what their budget was to get their project off the ground. They did that over the course of 2 years. And they estimated that their ongoing costs were somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million per year. And that's to keep their maps updated. They wanted to make sure that they update their maps annually, and also to make sure that they've got sort of the best data available on where every home and business is located in the state.
Okay, thank you very much. Representative Shaw, you had a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Help me understand the difference in the state providing broadband broadly and different entities like maybe your local providers providing it, and how that would connect with low-income families being able to receive the services, I guess, to pay for it. Because like if schools are using it and you got a student, low-income family, they had to pay for it. Just help talk me through that a little, because that's what I don't quite understand.
So, I think you bring up a very good point that cost, when it comes to the affordability of service, when it comes to the affordability of a device, is an important issue for a lot of our families, particularly low-income households. When you look at the survey results, that continues to be a significant reason why they say they cannot or they are not subscribing to broadband. So there are a number of programs out there. Some of them are public programs. Some of them are private sector programs. So for example, I mentioned that providers, these are your for-profit providers, your nonprofit providers, often do offer low-cost service plans for qualifying households. I think the other thing to keep in mind is there is a federal program, the federal Lifeline program, which does offer service or offers a service discount for qualifying households. It's currently around $9.25 per month. And that can be used on broadband service. So there are a number of different strategies out there that can help address that affordability barrier. And it's a matter of what works in your community and what resources your community has available to it. I think even the federal Lifeline program is actually through the Consolidated Appropriations Act that was just passed in December of 2020, has actually increased the discount up to $50 per month throughout the remainder of the pandemic or through the emergency period. So that'll be available for the Lifeline program, it appears. But again, this is something that is going to be community specific, likely.
Okay. One quick follow-up, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
Gosh, I forgot what it was. I have to ask you that. Let me think about that. Go ahead. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Shaw, while Jason Zachary's talking, you can think of it. Chairman Zachary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Doctor, thank you for the presentation. Very thorough. It was a good presentation. A couple of questions related to the 36,000 homes. Did I hear the number right? 36,000 homes. 36,000 homes to get broadband would be around $354 million. Did I hear that correctly?
So that was our upper end estimate for those 36,900 homes that are in census blocks where no one reported service as of December 2019. I apologize for all the qualifiers, where we anticipate that they won't receive coverage through an existing project. Yes, that upper end estimate is $354 million, and that is based on the maximum cost per location that we've seen in the state grant program to date.
And would that be fiber? Would that be coax? Would that be wireless? What's the qualifier for that upper end?
So we didn't put a qualifier. I will say we didn't put a qualifier on that in the report. It's based on the numbers that we've seen out of the state grant program. And I apologize, I cannot remember for that specific project what type of build that was that had the maximum. It was around, I think, $10,000 per location. And I apologize, I don't remember what
That's okay.
Technology was used for that.
A couple more, Mr. Chairman, if I may. You bring up I think it was in point number 2, or your recommendation number 2, is the 5 recommendations, correct? Yes, so in recommendation number 2 regarding broadband adoption, you make a really good point with libraries and schools. But I would push it beyond just providing quality access to the libraries and schools, and actually using the libraries and schools as a hub, where if you have a company like a Windstream who provides line of sight, and you're in an area where Windstream can provide service and they can come in and provide line of sight utilizing the library and the school in those rural communities that are somewhat flat, then you're talking about an adoption versus running coax versus running fiber. Then you've got line of sight where you can use that library and the school as the hub. They can put an antenna on top of that school. And then you're talking about just a small equipment purchase for each one of the homes, because then you've got a wide coverage. We could cover 20,000 people in a community versus the running of underground utilities. That service, line of sight service, Windstream provides that now. They provide it here in downtown Nashville. They provide it in rural communities, and I know it well because it's a product I sell. And so I would say that, and I'm not looking for a comment, I'm just saying that's more just of a catalyst that could be used, because it's all about driving down that $354 million, because we got $200 million from the state. We got $150 million from the federal government, $350 million testified this morning. It would cost roughly $400 million to provide access to everybody. And so if we can shrink that number by providing a high quality of asynchronous bandwidth to each one of those areas without having to dig like we did 10 years ago, because those days are quickly coming to an end, it provides for a much broader and quicker adoption. And then just quickly, my last point, Mr. Chairman, related to, I believe it was recommendation 5 with electric co-ops and utilities. You had made the reference that many of them would be willing to expand outside of their footprint. And I will just say bluntly, there is no doubt they would be willing to expand outside of their footprint, because they would be using taxpayer dollars to expand their footprint outside of where they serve areas now, which would require us as taxpayers. I know they have a match, but it would fund their expansion outside of their footprint, which would then basically on the back of the taxpayers enable them to compete head to head with a Comcast or with a Charter or with other entities. And so that is something we need to be very, very careful of as a committee and as a legislature, using taxpayer dollars, which they already are subsidized by the taxpayers, using taxpayer dollars to go to a co-op to provide them with the ability to expand to compete against the private sector. And so again, not looking for a comment, just I'm commenting on your point that that's something we have to be very, very careful of, is using our taxpayer dollars to subsidize the expansion of an entity's network to allow them to compete against the private sector. But thank you for the presentation. It was a really good presentation. I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman Zachary. Chairman Hazelwood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I add my kudos for the presentation to that of Chairman Zachary. A follow-up question from Chairman Zachary's comments and then to my question. But the TASA report, in your original recommendation, was the Muni expansion, was that a part of it, or was that added at a later date, that recommendation?
Are you referring to the recommendation related to the municipal utilities and electric cooperatives?
Expansions, yes.
So that our members chose to debate that recommendation and modified that at our meeting where they approved our final report. So that is their final recommendation. Yes.
Okay, but that was after some discussion. All right, because I didn't realize it was in there actually until you said that.
Apologize. Yeah.
The 36,000 number of households that we're talking about that are in, as I understand it, those are those that we know are in census blocks that are unserved. So to get to them, there's that wide range of dollars that Chairman Williams referenced. In addition to that, we have an unknown quantity in census blocks that the FCC has designated as served, but that might be only 2 customers out of 1,000 or whatever. So do we really have any kind, and maybe at this point there's no way to know, but looking at that wide range of dollars, that, if I'm hearing you correctly, that's just to serve the 36,000. There would be additional expense to get to those that are in census blocks that are only partially served?
That is correct.
And do we have any kind of swag figure about what that cost would be?
I apologize. I don't think I can provide you with that figure.
All right. Large number. Thank you.
Chairman Zachary, make it quick. We got on a time crunch.
One more. Dr. Owen, do you have a definition of unserved?
So what we use for our report is the standard that the FCC has adopted, which is based on the speed of service provided. So we use the FCC's 25 megabits per second download, 3 megabits per second upload standard when assessing whether an area was served or unserved for our report.
So just to be clear, it's the last question, Mr. Chairman. To be clear, you are classifying unserved as an area that has less than 25 mega bandwidth.
That's correct.
That is a significant problem, one we need to continue to move forward with, because if you have an area that has nothing and you can get them 10 mega bandwidth, they've gone from a bicycle to a Honda Accord. And that really sums up the issue I have with this entire discussion that we're related to broadband. And I'm not saying it's not your fault, obviously. But again, you have an area that has nothing, which many areas right around me in Knox County have nothing. And if I go to them and tell them I can get them 10 meg, or I can go to Chairman Williams' district in some of the rural areas and say, you have nothing, I can get you 10 meg. That is an absolute game changer. Get some telemedicine, get some access to, they can watch Netflix if they want to. And so we have to get our arms around that. And I've talked to Sammy about that in ECD in detail. That is something that we have to address before we move forward with this. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here. For the record, you do get Netflix even in rural districts like Cookeville, Tennessee. But anyways, I appreciate your testimony here today. I think one of the things that's a big takeaway for me, though, is if we're the same population base as Georgia and we spent $10 million over the next 5 years, we could know exactly how the length, width, and breadth of the problem by doing some mapping in order to understand what exactly we're doing in the state. And so it's a big takeaway for me, but I appreciate your testimony today, and you're always willing to come down and shed some light on to difficult subjects. And so thank you for that today. That being said, gentlemen, if you are dismissed, I also have presenting today just to tell us a little bit about from ECD, our good friend Sammy Arnold. He is Deputy Commissioner of Rural Initiatives for the governor from ECD. I promised him that you would not ask anything over a 30,000 foot view as it relates to questions, as it relates to rural broadband, but I thought it was important for him to tell us, for those of us that might not know, how the grant system works through his department, how it's distributed, what the match is, and those kinds of things. And so we are going to save just a little bit of time after a brief discussion from him for questions for you as well. But you can state your name if you want to, even though I've introduced you. But Sammy Arnold, you're recognized.
Thanks, Chairman Williams. Sammy Arnold, ECD, and Assistant Commissioner over Rural Development at the department. Want to acknowledge Matt and Tasser. We really recommend their report. It's one of the better reports you'll read. We refer to it frequently. Also want to acknowledge my broadband director, Crystal Ivey, who is out of pocket this afternoon, and apologize to anybody who's got technical questions that I can't answer. But I assure you, anything I can't answer, I'll have you an answer by tomorrow morning. So just wanted to start at the beginning here by acknowledging really the driving force behind all this, which is that we have a rural governor who ran on supporting rural Tennessee and making sure rural families in Tennessee don't get left behind. And the governor's commitment to broadband access for all Tennesseans really is a foundational part of our total rural economic development strategy, which is a comprehensive strategy. And I'd love the opportunity to come by and talk to any of you about it. But we're here today to talk about broadband, so I'll stay focused on that. In progress thus far. So the Broadband Accessibility Act passed the legislature in 2017, accomplished three primary things. First of all, there created our grant program that we have administered for almost 4 years now. And it's a grant program that's been recognized nationally by the Pew Center and other folks like that. Several state programs that have come online after ours, they reach out to us to try and replicate parts of our program. We really feel like we're seen as a national leader on this. The second thing that the bill accomplished, the bill wisely deregulated the market and allowed electric cooperatives, which are privately owned, to enter the broadband space and they have been some of our best partners thus far in this effort. And then finally, the bill gave us a mechanism to support adoption and digital inclusion efforts in all 95 counties. And I want to talk more about that in 1 second. To the fundamental question here of why are some areas served and why are some areas not? Very simple. It's a cost-benefit problem. In the areas that are still densely populated, which means fewer customers to be able to give you your ROI. So what our grant program does very simply is we share a portion of that upfront cost with the provider to make it economically feasible for them to do the project. That second item there, the adoption problem. So a parallel issue here that's also crucial, Matt talked about it, is that many Americans who have access to broadband don't use it. Either because they can't afford it or they don't know how, and they don't see the value maybe in an internet subscription. According to the FCC, there's a 58% adoption rate in Tennessee, as Matt alluded to. Maybe a little low. Tasser estimated, I think, based on some stuff from the Pew Center, that it may be about 10 points higher than that. And there's a survey from the Census Bureau that estimated to be up around 80. But regardless, there's work to be done here as well. We don't just want people to have access. We want them to use it in ways that provide an economic development return for the state. So this is a snapshot of our program to date. And as you can see here, we have awarded 3 rounds of grants so far. In a fourth round, as you see in the upper right corner, a fourth round is going to be awarded later this month. That's with the $15 million that the legislature appropriated this time last year. All those dots on that map represent all the projects that we've supported with our state program so far. The demand for these grants is always very much higher than the amount that we have to award. And as you can see, we've given 39 grants to date to build high-speed internet to 65,750 unserved Tennesseans. And so if you do the math there, that equals out to about $675 per person that we've gotten connected through this program thus far. Here, I want to brag to support this effort. I seriously doubt any state's done as well as we have on this front. Most recently, Governor Lee and the Financial Stimulus Accountability Group directed $61 million from the CARES Act for about 60 emergency broadband projects across the state that finished in about 3 months and connected over 55,000 unserved Tennesseans. Really good work by our providers. And then secondly, we've done very well with USDA Reconnect, which is a USDA program for broadband expansion. When Secretary Perdue was here in Middle Tennessee a couple of months ago, he referenced our state program as a big part of the reason why Tennessee providers have fared so well with USDA Reconnect, because they want to invest in states that are investing in themselves. And Tennessee was one of the states that was on that list. And then finally, Appalachian Regional Commission there, we've directed millions out of our ARC allotment to support broadband builds in Appalachia. So I want to take a quick minute to kind of talk about how comprehensively this affects everything that we do at ECD, and that several other state agencies do as well. So at ECD, we're best known for recruiting companies, right, who create jobs, and we compete against Georgia and Alabama and Texas and South Carolina for those. It will not make the short list for any recruitment project. That's widely known in the site selection community and has been for 10 years. We desperately and are being urged by Governor Lee to try and land some of these in rural areas and struggling areas. But they got to have good broadband access to even be in the game. And then with agriculture, farmers without broadband access at this point are at a significant competitive disadvantage with farmers from other states. Precision agriculture, which is enabled by broadband access, allows farmers to be more efficient with their time, more cost effective with their resources. And the idea of our farmers being at a disadvantage compared to farmers from other states is definitely not something that's palatable to the governor. And I know the same is true for most of you guys. So broadband investments is definitely an investment in our farmers as well. Education, many of you know better than I do, but so much of education now is online and customized. Rural kids live in unconnected homes. They're at a disadvantage compared to their peers who live in town. Maybe in a wealthier, and that's just not something that feels good to think about. And then in terms of local communities, many rural communities across America have been getting older and have been shrinking in population for a long time now. A big part of that is poor broadband access. Young people don't want to live in a place where they're not connected. They're going to move elsewhere and they're going to create economic impact there. Rural tourism, we hear from so many marina owners, fishing lodges, hiking outfitter type places that who are begging for broadband because like it doesn't matter if you're a traveler, if you're a fisherman, if you're a duck hunter, you don't want to go stay and hang out at a place where you can't be connected and you can't check in with your family and check in with the world back home. And then finally, I know very little about healthcare, but what I've gathered is that whatever the solution is for rural healthcare, telemedicine is definitely going to have to be a big part of it. And obviously, you don't have telemedicine without broadband. So if I can just touch specifically on how the pandemic kind of brought this issue even more to the forefront. So because of the dramatic increases in remote work, virtual learning, telehealth, and all these other things, upstream internet usage increased by 63% in a single year, which is remarkable. But as with most disruptive events like the pandemic, we think there are some significant opportunities that we may be able to take advantage of if we position ourselves well to do so. So number one is that there seems to be a strong possibility that companies, say in Nashville, who have a hard time finding employees in a very competitive labor environment here, can recruit employees who live in Salina or Gainesboro or Hohenwald or something like that. And likewise, companies in Memphis could recruit in Bolivar or Ripley. And if you live in Bolivar, you wouldn't want to drive to Memphis for work 5 days a week. But you know, if you only got to go 1 day a week or 2 days a month and you can make more money, yeah, sign me up. So that's a legitimate possibility that we want to take advantage of post-pandemic, but we got to have robust broadband access across the state to be able to do so. And we also need to make sure that these folks have a marketable skill set, which brings me to the second item there. The pandemic has really forced a lot of institutions across the country to ramp up their online course offerings. And the opportunities to get an online degree or certificate have never been more plentiful, but you're not going to do it if you have to drive to the McDonald's parking lot every night to do your homework. So what the governor at the state of the state? The governor's proposing two one-time investment that we believe will likely be enough to support broadband expansion across the entire state. Definitely is a bold proposal, and but thanks to some very smart, very conservative budgeting by Governor Lee and the General Assembly, when the pandemic hit, we're in the strong fiscal position that we're in as a state right now, where this one-time money is available. And the governor wants to commit to this and let every unserved Tennessean know that we're going to get this done. Thought it'd also be good to point out that Governor Lee is not alone on this. So as you can see there are a lot of governors across the country planning to go big on broadband this year, starting with Governor Reynolds in Iowa, who's proposing $450 million for broadband expansion, going all the way down to South Dakota there, where Governor Kristi Noem legislature. What's even more interesting is some of these states. So South Dakota's entire budget is $5 billion compared to ours, which is about 40. And then Iowa's total budget, I think, is $8 billion, so about 1/5 the size of ours. Just seems that the pandemic has really sharpened the urgency of this issue in the minds of a lot of public officials, and that's why you're seeing this. So we got some photos here of the project some projects that we've supported with our grant dollars. That is Appalachian Electric in Jefferson County. That's Holston in Hawkins County there. That's a company called SkyBest in Johnson County there, and that's them using a helicopter to lay this infrastructure, which is pretty amazing. One thing that's important to note here, these are infrastructure projects, and infrastructure requires construction. So this is something that's going to take time. And if this appropriation gets approved, there could be a lot of constituents calling you the next day saying, hey, when's my broadband getting turned on? Doesn't work that way, unfortunately. Infrastructure takes time to build, and this is definitely going to be a multi-year effort. And then if you'll just indulge me here, this is my last slide. Let me zoom out a little bit and kind of paint the picture of our rural development story here in Tennessee. We've got a story developing that I think is really remarkable. So in 2013, as you can see there, we really hit a low point in terms of rural development. That year we had 26 distressed counties. and we had 60 counties in the bottom 25% of the nation in terms of economic attainment. 60 out of 95 counties in the bottom 25% of the country. It was a major, major problem. Today, we are down to 11 distressed counties and 37 counties that are in the bottom quartile of the country. And that's still way too many, but it's a dramatic turnaround to say the very least. And it's not because of any one thing, but a number of things and rural development efforts that began under Governor Haslam and have been really dramatically accelerated by Governor Lee. Just wanted to let everybody know it certainly feels like the ship is pointing in the right direction on this. We need to keep the foot on the gas pedal. So that's it. Just to close, I want to acknowledge that $200 million is a lot of money. It definitely is. And nobody takes that lightly, right? But I think the position of the governor is that our rural communities are worth this investment. They're worth preserving. And it feels like it's time to get this issue fixed. We don't want to keep talking about this over and over. And so we've got communities being left behind, and we've got kids being left behind, and our rural communities and our rural families deserve the same access to the same opportunities that urban and suburban folks have. So that's it for me, sir. I'll pause and take questions. Thanks again for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. That was a great presentation. I will say before we go any further, it is amazing. I've served here since 2010 to see how our rural, your word, resurgence or the improvements being made there are literally dramatic. And I think it has a lot to do with just having a consecrated focus on it over an extended period of time. And so very exciting what you're doing there. And so I really appreciate that. One of the things that was that I wanted to ask you, and then I'll get to my other colleagues because I want to be respectful of your time. I know you've got a little child to get back to, so it's important to do that. But there was a discussion about, about setting a new parameter on these resources, about the idea of the grant process requiring a certain take rate as it relates to it. Sometimes in ECD, most of what we do is a reimbursement grant, right? We say, hey, this is a deal. I didn't know if your department has looked at, if you exceed this take rate, you get a bonus or some kind of incentive as it relates to the overall cost, with an idea that there has to be some implementation or take rate formulary in which we exhort people to do this. Has your department looked at anything, or has any other states, to your knowledge, done any data that would require that of this 22,000 people we're trying to serve, 50% of them have to take. If they don't, then you give us money back, or if they go more than that, we give you more money.
Yeah. I'm not aware that any other states do that, Chairman. That's something that we can talk to the providers about. I'd be interested to hear what they say about that. The way that we try and affect that is one of the items that we score on our applications is community support. So if there is tremendous community support for an application, that if they've got communities that are sending us letters, we sort of draw a line that community is going to have a higher adoption rate. So if we get an application where there's no community support letters attached to it, then we might question at this point, like, well, maybe there's not as strong a demand here, and so we'll deprioritize that application in favor of applications that have strong community support. So it's a fair point, and that's a conversation that we can have with the providers. The one thing that strikes me is the providers want more than anybody people to adopt the service. So I don't know what the providers might do, to hit that incentive or to keep from having to, for us to claw money back from them. But again, it's an interesting thought, and we can talk to them about it.
Yeah, I think it would be good only because if we get into the process where we're actually mapping and understanding the data better, they might know better about the end user before they go to spend the money to put it in there. And so it might help them as it relates to that. I don't know. It's pure speculation on my part. Chairman Garrett, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here. I know just very little about broadband and didn't even hardly realize how many folks that don't have it. So I'm thrilled that we are investing this one-time money, the $200 million, to expand and make sure our folks in rural Tennessee have this. I'm curious, though, if the ECD is coordinating any efforts. I know under the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund. There's an enormous amount of money coming in to do this exact effort from the federal side. So my concern is, are we doing anything to ensure there's not too much overlap? In other words, there's not way too much money coming into one area that obviously needs that money that's taking away from maybe another area.
Yeah, that's right.
It's not going to get both funds. So I was wondering if you could respond to that by any chance.
Yeah, sure. And that's why I showed the slide 4 or 5, whatever it was, about our track record of leveraging federal funds thus far, I think has been second to none. I think that the concern that Matt raised is that if we go through a mapping exercise like Georgia's, and Georgia's results found out that the FCC undershot their number of unserved populations by about a third, I think. It certainly feels like we're going to need all the federal resources that we can continue to pull down. And we've done that in the past, and we want to keep doing it. And whether it's USDA Reconnect or the CARES Act money or the ARC money, it's sort of, to me, it's like a puzzle. You make all the puzzles pieces fit together in a certain way that really maximizes our state dollars. Another thing that's being talked about now is I don't know if there's going to, I have no idea what Congress is doing, right? But if there's another stimulus bill, there could be some broadband infrastructure money in that. There supposedly was going to be some in the last one, then it got pulled out. So who knows? But regardless, definitely can assure you that we will make it a priority to use federal money in a smart way that preserves Tennessee taxpayer dollars.
Well, thank you for that. I'd echo that. I'm not really sure at all what Congress tends to be doing these days, but I just want to make sure that, as a Tennessee taxpayer, we hold these funds. We want to make sure that that areas that do deserve this certainly do not get what I would refer to as maybe double subsidized in a sense from both the state level and obviously the federal level. So I appreciate your commitment to making sure all rural Tennesseans get the broadband access that they deserve. So thank you very much for that. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Quick follow-up to that about CARES money. $61 million. We spent $60 million since this inception. $61 million of CARES Act money. It's spent exactly the same way. So technically, including CARES Act money, we spent $121 million. We're going to.
Well, so you're counting the CARES Act money as state money?
If we're using the same grant process in order to expend that, are we or no?
No.
Okay.
Well, a little different. So the state match rate was higher for the CARES Act dollars because the providers only had 3 months to finish the project. So it's a little different. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Chairman Zachary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sammy, thank you to you, Crystal, Commissioner, for all the side conversations, the additional meetings to make sure we get this right. And I appreciate your team and your commitment to making sure we get this right to reach the governor's goals. After Dr. Owen's presentation, I feel real strongly about, in order to achieve the governor's goals, in order to maximize and steward these resources well, as Representative Garrett said, and to make sure that we hit the unserved community, I think it's really important that we establish the proper definition, the Tennessee definition, which is the right definition for unserved. And then we also establish a new definition for underserved. Because again, an underserved area and an unserved area should look very, very different. And in the definition that Dr. Long gave, which I know is not his definition, it's the FCC definition, underserved would be a community that's under 25 meg. And so looking at that to maximize these resources, we cannot subsidize carriers and providers utilizing tax dollars to expand network capacity and increase infrastructure within an existing network to an area that already has broadband access. And so in order to make sure we're accomplishing the goals, we have to be, whether we have to do it statutorily or you guys are able to establish that working with us, the proper definition for unserved and underserved. There have to be two definitions. And I believe the match percentage has to look very different for an underserved area than it does unserved, whether it's 50-50, and I know there may be even some flexibility with that. With an underserved area, an area where you have got capacity now and you've got broadband, then the match for those, it should really be further down the list, and then the match should look a little bit different. So I'd like to have further conversations related to those specifics.
Yeah, that sounds good. And we'll have Crystal there for that because I'll need her. But another thing that I would want to stress too is when we crafted that 2017 bill, we had tons and tons of stakeholder input into that bill. So to the extent that we could incorporate input from all the stakeholders, if we're going to contemplate changing any of the program guidelines or even potentially the statute, that I think that's something that served us very well in 2017. I think it would serve us really well going forward as well.
Mr. Chairman, last comment. And I think it's important to remember too, working with a provider, whomever that provider is, it's the same as if you go to a guy and ask him if you need an oil change, and he's going to tell you, yeah, you need an oil change. If you go to a provider and ask them, should we spend resources on this? And would this definition fit with what we're trying to accomplish, while they also know they can use tax dollars to expand and improve infrastructure? Of course, they're going to say yes and move toward that definition. But yeah, I look forward to having that conversation further. Thanks.
Representative Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I appreciate what Chairman Zachary is saying, because I'm in an unserved area. But I got to tell you, to be underserved is almost as bad as not being served at all. So that brings me back to, how do we craft this where, it's best not to have broadband if you don't have it that'll work, So how do we really accomplish the goal of providing it for every Tennessean, where everybody will have decent broadband? I mean, do you get me?
I think so. That definitely is what we're trying to do. And the way that our program is structured now, Representative, yes, we can give a grant to anybody any area that the FCC says is unserved, but we have to prioritize areas that don't even have 10.1 internet,
Right.
which is the less than what the FCC defines as. That's slower than what the FCC defines as broadband. And so if you don't even have the 10.1 speed, we have to prioritize you in the application process. But does that answer your question?
It does, but I guess it
Okay.
brings me back to, and I know he was talking about the taxpayers' dollars, but I think the underserved is being underserved because you got some providers trying to cover too much. I don't know if I know what I'm talking about, but too much territory. I think somehow or another people got to be clustered. The providers got to be clustered to some degree so we can get good service for all Tennesseans. And you talked about the farmers, and I appreciate the conversation because, I'm surrounded by farmers as well as residential areas, people who really got to have broadband to be successful. But the farmer can't run his planter down in the boondock with underserved broadband.
Sure. Yeah.
Thank you. Arnold, thank you for coming today. I really appreciate it. We're ran out of time. I think that's all the questions we have for today. Commissioner Arnold is happy to answer any questions. If you have any questions as it relates to TASER, you're welcome to send them to my office. Gentlemen, we appreciate the discussion today. Unlike getting an oil change, though, these people are paying 50% of the oil change, so it's kind of nice to understand that. But we appreciate the partnership. Any other business before the members? Seeing none, we're adjourned. All right. I guess we'll sort it all out tomorrow.